Okay. Donna. Over there. Okay. With the video has started, so we're going to welcome everybody and start with a song this morning. I Stand Amazed. And I think this is one that all of you know, so I need y'all to sing out loud and strong. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus in Nazarene, and wonder how he loved me, a sinner condemned unclean. How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. He took my sins and my sorrows, He made them His very own. He bore the burden to Calvary and suffered and died alone. I'll sing. How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. When with a ransom in glory His face I at last shall see, will be my joy through the ages to sing of His love for me. How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. Chorus, one more time. How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. All right. Miss Shirley, that must be one of your favorites, because you had your hand raising, just singing, so that must be one of your, is it a favorite? Good, I'm glad. All right. So, the trivia question today, as some of you may know, today is National Secretary's Day. Today is.
Administrative professional, sir.
And they've changed the name to Professional Administrative, but some people don't know it as that, so that's why I'm saying Secretary's Day, for everybody that knows that. And the very first one is the trivia question. When did it first start happening?
Oh boy. Give us a
I'll give you a hint. It was before I was born.
Oh my.
1964.
Ooh, can we go back that far?
Before 1964. Just guess the year.
1963?
Raise a hand. Nope. Marie?
62.
Nope. Kathy?
54.
No.
50.
Nope.
61.
1958.
Nope.
43.
Jody, raise your hands. Jody?
1960.
No.
58.
Nope. Jane?
1946.
No. Shirley?
1932.
No. Rudy?
1959.
No. Oh my goodness, y'all said every date but this. Yes, ma'am.
1942.
What?
1942.
No.
1942.
Brenda?
1946.
No. Ed?
Secretary's Day or
52.
goodness.
It was 1952. 1952. How many of y'all were born in 1952? Anybody?
Close.
Okay.
Close.
All right, Donna, Miss Donna, you ready? Okay. Maybe make sure you talk into the mic because we got a lively crowd this morning.
I'll try, as long as it's my eyeball. Okay. today. And I am having a little issue with my eyes, which I'm having it taken care of in a couple of weeks. So if I sound like I'm not quite saying it properly, just laugh. You know, she can't read or think of something funny. But anyway, a wife was making a breakfast of fried eggs for her husband. Suddenly her husband burst into the kitchen. "Careful," he said, "careful. Put in some more butter." "Oh my gosh, you're cooking too many of them. Too many. Turn them now. We need more butter." "Oh my goodness, where are you going to get more butter? They're going to stick. Careful, careful. I say be careful. You never listen to me when you're cooking, never. Turn them up, turn them over. Are you crazy? Have you lost your mind? Don't forget to salt them. You know you always forget to salt them. Use the salt, use the salt, use the salt." The wife stares at him. She says, "What in the world is wrong with you? You think I don't know how to fry a couple of eggs?" The husband calmly replied, "I just wanted to show you what it feels like when I'm driving."
What?
I have that problem, so it's not me. Anyway, two elderly gentlemen from a retirement center were sitting on a bench under a tree when one turned to the other and said, "Slim, I'm 83 years old now, and I'm just full of aches and pains. I know you're about my age. How do you feel?" Slim says, "I feel like a newborn baby." "Really? Like a newborn baby?" "Yep, no hair, no teeth, and I think I just wet my pants." The elderly gentleman had serious hearing problems for a number of years. He went to the doctor, and the doctor was able to have him fitted for a set of hearing aids that allowed him to hear 100%. He went back in a month, and the doctor said, "Your hearing is perfect. Your family must be really pleased that you can hear again." The gentleman replied, "Oh, I haven't told my family yet. I just sit around and listen to the conversation. I've changed my will 3 times." And now I think still, I did this once before when I first started. You don't stop laughing because you grow old. You grow old because you stop laughing.
Very true.
And faith is in God's form. To have faith is defy logic. To take faith to think positively, it takes faith to believe that there is a loving God who cares deeply about our pain. To believe in life, the universe, or yourself, after numerous failures, to have courage. Faith is an act of courage. It is choosing to get up in the morning, face our fears, and believe that God will help us. Faith is choosing to believe that even though we may have failed 100 times before, that we can succeed the next time.
Thank you.
Great.
Yes, that's true. She said that kind of reminded her of David getting back up after failure. And we've seen a few of those happening already in David's life as we've been tracing his days from the earliest time in his life as a shepherd boy on into where we are now in 2 Samuel chapter 9. I was listening to the joke about not hearing, but really being able to hear. And I had this, I still have it in my car actually, this dash cam where it records where you're driving and stuff, which is kind of neat. It's kind of good if you have it and someone tries to do the whole insurance fraud where they hit the brakes real quick right before in front of you. That's happened a couple times in cars that I've been in, so I've been paranoid about that. Anyway, so I had this thing in my car, and I didn't realize this at first, but it was actually recording audio in the car at the same time as recording the video. And I did have that moment where I thought to myself, should I tell my wife about this or not? Or do I actually, should I move forward with the spy technology that exists in my car? But I gave in and told her about it. And sure enough, she made sure that I disabled that sucker before going any further with the dashboard cam. So fear not. If you're in my car and we're in a conversation, it's not being recorded. I can't promise any other places that you may be in conversation. I'm just kidding. All right. I will leave the jokes to Miss Donna as we get into 2 Samuel chapter 9. We're still in the high part of David's life here. This is the heyday for David, his kingdom. He's won a bunch of victories militarily. He's won over the house of Saul, and so now he is. Am I too loud now? Am I yelling? I get excited. Now he's in this time of peace, and he's doing some pretty cool things. We're going to see one of the cool things he does in this time of peace. But the crash is about to happen soon, and as soon as David falls into temptation with Bathsheba, there's going to be all kinds of turmoil that happens within his own family, within his own household. And it's interesting, there are lots of things that we can point back to in our life that maybe took a long time for it to come to fruition. But once it came to fruition, we realized, man, this was a long time coming. There's little things that we saw all along the way that caused these other things to happen. And you really see that in David's life in the weeks ahead. But let's spend some time talking about something positive and happy today. It's a nice, beautiful day outside. It's not gray and sad. We don't have to talk about any deaths as far as I'm concerned at this point. So let's do that. Let's talk about something chipper. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, we're going to talk about grace. Grace is a word that's used fairly commonly. It's similar to love, where you can use it for all kinds of different things. What are some ways that people use the word grace? Talk about prayer as grace. Who says grace before a meal? That kind of thing. What else?
Somebody's graceful.
Graceful, right? You think of a dancer dancing gracefully. I'm sure you have Steve in your mind as he dances. He's graceful. Actually, Steve would surprise you at how gracefully he can move. I knew Steve when he was, 200-300 pounds heavier than he is now. And that man, he always had the reputation, when I was a college student, I was way less mature than I am now. Which is...
Weren't we all?
Well, I mean, that's really saying something, because even now you're like, I don't know about that guy. So in college, it's way worse. And one of the things I loved to do was try to get on Steve's nerves, because Steve would be like the dean of the week of camp that I'd work in. I'd be on a college team and stuff, and we try to aggravate him as much as possible, because it's just fun. There's certain people that it's just fun to aggravate. So I do that. But Steve always was able to catch any of us before we could actually get out of the dining hall. Like, we would go to Steve, we would say something, upset him in some way, just try to get him off center a little bit, and he'd be sitting there 1 minute, and the next second he is right there in your face. That man could move quicker than anybody else I knew. So, all that to say, you can use the word graceful when you think of Steve Jackson. So that's a word. That's a way that the word's used. Grace is a name that people oftentimes use, right? Name their kids Grace. Maybe you know someone named Grace. But more importantly, the biblical sense of grace, when it's used, it is talking about something very specific. 2 words for that. It is unmerited favor. Unmerited favor. When you think about merit, what you think about is someone earning favor from someone. So if it's unmerited, that means it's favor. It's a good thing that someone does for you in a time when you did not earn it. So when you have grace in that biblical sense, it is giving someone something they didn't earn and can never repay you for. So we're about to see what I think is the greatest illustration of grace in the Old Testament. Swindoll definitely puts that up there as one of the greatest ones in the Old Testament. And it's a little known story. I've preached on it here before. It's one of my favorite sermons to preach on this obscure man in the Old Testament whose name is Mephibosheth. It sounds like a sneeze, so I want you to sneeze along with me. Try to say that along with me, or right after I say it. Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth. It rolls off the tongue once you get used to saying it. So I would venture to say that could be a good name that we can bring back. You know, I thought I was being unique when I named my middle child Chloe. Everybody's named Chloe now. But I think if I ever had a guy and I named him Mephibosheth, I could be pretty confident and secure. There's not a whole lot of Mephs out there, right? Mephibosheth. I like it. But Yeah, it's spelled like it sounds, basically. So, as opposed to some of the other Old Testament names that we try to just fudge as we're reading along out loud in the Old Testament. But this guy is going to become very important in David's story in just a moment. We're going to see that happening in this chapter. So, as we talked about last week, not last week, but the week before last, because we were off last week, I was literally off on vacation. The first half of the week, I was working on a car, trying to get the car fixed for Chloe to return home. She'll be coming back next weekend. It won't be fixed by then. But still, spent some time to do that. And then the second half of the week, we went to a campground called First Landing, which was beautiful, gorgeous. I was just telling folks that this is one of the rare places on the East Coast where you can watch a sunset over water because it's over the bay there. And so the campground's right on the shore of the Chesapeake Bay. And it was like for the tent site, which doesn't have any hookups. We actually had some water. We were fortunate enough to get close to a pump that's kind of a shared one. So that meant we slept in a tent one night. We slept on an air mattress in the back of this big truck that we have another night, and we thought we were younger than we actually are. We realized that very quickly when we woke up in the morning. So David's in a much nicer place as we saw him last time. He's there in his castle. He's sitting in front of the fireplace. I imagine him just trying to kick back there on his lazy boy. And he's thinking through the history of battles that he fought, how he got to be in the kingdom that he's in now. And of course, along the way, he thought about his friend Jonathan and the impact that this close friend had on him, on his life. And as he's thinking about this, he remembers a promise that David made to Jonathan. And so he addresses this at the very beginning of the chapter in 2 Samuel 9:1, where David asks, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" All right, so this is the premise to everything else that's going to happen in this chapter. So it's good to know this is why David's doing what he's doing, and this is why what's going to happen to Mephibosheth is going to happen to him. It comes from a promise that was made early on. And so kindness actually is probably not the best translation of the Hebrew word there for what David wants to do. A better translation, I bet you could guess what it would be in this setting. It would be grace. Someone I could show unmerited favor towards for Jonathan's sake. And so here's the promise that David made. This was in 1 Samuel 20. You guys remember what was happening there where David and Jonathan are close. They're closer than brothers. David, the Bible says, loved Jonathan more than even a man would love a woman. That's the intimacy that they have as friends. And so they're very close, and David has to convince Jonathan that his father Saul is actually intending to kill him. Jonathan doesn't believe it at first, and so they decide they were going to test out if this was true. Jonathan was going to approach his father about it, find out about it, and if it is true, that they would send a message, actually to shoot an arrow in a certain way that they knew whether or not it was true that Saul wanted to, if it was confirmed that Saul wanted to kill David. So this all happens, and before it happens, they make this promise that we read here in verse 13 of 1 Samuel 20. "If my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away in peace." This is Jonathan speaking. "May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. So we talked about this back when we were studying this earlier in this study of David's life, that it was customary in that time for any new king who came into power, especially through military force, to wipe out the whole family of the king that loses the battle. The reason for that is because this isn't a time of nobility where everybody believes that royalty runs through bloodlines. It's not a political office. It's a royal office that goes through bloodlines. And so if there's anyone who survives as a prince or duke or whatever that's connected to that family, they must be cut off. Otherwise, there will be somebody who will come along later who say they rightfully have the throne. And by doing that, they will start a whole other military skirmish. So this is actually for future peace that these kings would do this. And this is why it seems so bloody in 1st and 2nd Kings, when you have all of these Israelite and then southern kingdom, Judah, those kings killing off one another, mainly in Israel, and whole families are decimated through this because that was customary. So with that in mind, this is why Jonathan wanted David to make this promise, that he would break the custom of doing this because he was sure to be the next one to take the throne. So that's why Jonathan asked for the favor. Favor is a blank there. And this is a favor that David is making good on. Now, David didn't just make the promise to Jonathan. He actually makes it to someone else as well, interestingly. 1 Samuel 24, verses 20 and 22. This is one of the times where David had the opportunity to kill Saul. God had basically, it seemed like, put Saul into his hands, and David is able to approach Saul within reach to cut off the corner of his robe, and then he shows Saul that he had the opportunity, but he didn't take it out of respect for the office that Saul held as the king. And so Saul is humbled by this, and he says these words, 1 Samuel 24:20, "I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands." That's a lot for a king to say to someone who's coming, a lot for Saul particularly to say to David. "Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not kill off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family." So David gave this oath to Saul. Then Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Of course, this is years before Saul actually takes the throne, but he makes this promise both to Jonathan and to Saul. So it's not just a promise, it's a covenant. Covenants are important all throughout the Bible. It's the nature of the relationship that we have with God even now as Christians, a covenant with Him. So David made this promise, these covenants with father and son here, and he's thinking back on that now in 2 Samuel 9. But he doesn't know if there's anybody alive in the house or not, because there was a huge war, and we didn't read a whole lot into that in the beginning of 2 Samuel, but even after Saul and Jonathan had died, you had the military ruler, Abner, I think his name was, who was still trying to keep the throne in the house of Saul, but of course lost the battles in that way, and that's when David rose to the throne. And he's not sure if there's someone who is still alive for him to be able to fulfill this promise. So he asked the question. He doesn't ask, is there anyone qualified? What he asks is there any, or he doesn't ask, is there anyone worthy? He is basically asking if there is anybody who is alive to accept this offer that's based on unconditional love. So, in other words, love is a blank there. What I'm trying to say there is David is going to show love towards someone without even knowing who they are and what kind of person they are, because he's already made a promise to fulfill, no matter who that person is, just by virtue of the fact that they are still within Saul's household. So this is how grace works into the situation. So they find somebody who's still alive in the house, but you'll never guess who it is. 2 Samuel 9, verses 2 through 4. "Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They summoned him to appear before David, and the king said to him, 'Are you Ziba?' Ziba is the servant. He's not in the household. He served the household of Saul. 'At your service,' he replied. The king asked, 'Is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?' Ziba answered the king, 'There's still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet.' 'Where is he?' the king asked. Ziba answered, 'He's at the house of Micah, son of Amiel in Lo-debar.'" There's a whole lot of loaded stuff that's happening here, as Ziba is describing this one survivor in Saul's household. It's Jonathan's son. So Jonathan has a son David didn't know about, And you can see there's a close connection there with his good friend. And if you read between the lines of Ziba's comment, you'd see that he's basically saying that this guy wouldn't look right in the king's court with two crippled feet. Two crippled feet. Blanks. Two crippled feet. So David's saying, is there anybody in the house that I can show honor to? That's a way of him interpreting, here's someone that I'd like to bring into my household in honor. And maybe Ziba was aware of this promise that he had already made to Saul. But for some reason or another, Mephibosheth was never brought up to David as being a person to honor in that way. And I think maybe Ziba might have been trying to maneuver his way into, well, I'm close enough to the household of Saul that you can honor me instead of this crippled kid who lives in this strange place. And so it's like there's an implication here. There's this guy who is Saul's son, but he's crippled. But grace isn't picky. It's one-sided. It is all give and no take. Those are a couple of blanks. It's all give and no take. It's unconditional. There's another way to say it. And so he describes this person who's the son of Jonathan. He hasn't given a name yet, but he's given where the person lives. And the name of the land that Mephibosheth is living in is pretty interesting. The interpretation of the name is no pasture or no pasture land. Lo means no, and debar means pasture. So this person is living, this kid is living, or man at this point, is living some obscure barren field in Palestine, maybe in a desert. I'm picturing just this single wide trailer in a desert, where this person who used to be in the royal line of Saul in the kingdom, now in this place of barrenness, and he's hiding for his life. The reason he's there is because he's most likely afraid for his life, that if David finds him, what's he think is going to happen? What always happens to the sons and grandsons of kings that have come prior to the kings in power? They die brutal deaths. So he's probably just hiding for his life. And so we actually get a little bit more of a description of who this Mephibosheth is. We step back in time to 2 Samuel chapter 4. There's this description that's given in parentheses about Mephibosheth there. It's kind of like a foreshadowing that Samuel gives as he's recording these events in this family. And here's the description. Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. What news? That they died. Okay, so at the age of 5, this boy's father and grandfather dies in battle, and the kingdom changes hands, or will change hands soon. So his nurse picks him up and fled. Why is she running? Because of the custom, right? It's the only person left in the household. She's the caretaker of this 5-year-old boy, and she takes it upon herself to get him out of the situation so that these soldiers don't come and kill him, and likely would have. Like David wasn't even paying attention to any of this stuff, the promise that he gave to Saul and Jonathan, until later, right? Until we're reading about here in chapter 9. So this nurse likely saves this boy's life as she's running, but as she hurried to leave, she fell and became disabled. Or he fell and became disabled.
He fell.
That's right. So she fell, he fell on his ankle somehow, and this is before the day and age where they knew you could set a bone and walk straight after that. So this person probably had a pretty bad fracture in both ankles, and so for the rest of his life was either unable to walk or walked in a very difficult way. And his name was Mephibosheth. So it's bad enough he had bad ankles. He also had a bad name. I think it's great. He's hiding, right? So this happens at 5 years old. The nurse is running. So I imagine at an impressionable time, he's learned, I need to hide from this person, David. He's the reason my ankles are broken. I can't walk correctly. The last person, this kid, who's now probably a little bit older, maybe in teenage years now, last person he would want to see is this king, or a messenger from this king knocking on his single wide trailer door in no pasture land. But that's exactly what happens. And so Mephibosheth is brought face to face with the king, the person that maybe haunted his nightmares, that he feared the most likely. You can see that in the way Mephibosheth reacts to this encounter. 2 Samuel 9, verses 5 through 7. King David had him brought from Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, Mephibosheth. Now he's excited when he sees Mephibosheth. Probably excited because this is the son of his good friend Jonathan. But Mephibosheth's hearing him exclaim his name is probably thinking he's excited for a different reason. Like, I finally found you, you know. Now you're dead, you know. So Mephibosheth is saying, at your service. And of course David notices that this boy is like terrified. And he says, don't be afraid. For I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. That is huge. All of the land that belonged to Saul, this was all of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, before David expanded it with the military victories over the Philistines. This is a huge area of property. He's saying, I'll restore all of this to you, and you're going to be in my family. For him to say you're going to eat at my table, that's not just a nice meal ticket. That's acceptance into a family. So imagine how Mephibosheth's emotions just swung in that moment. Is that the past tense? I don't know. Swing, swing, swung.
Yeah, there you go.
How they swung. And he goes from like being scared for his life to now being restored in this tremendous way. Why? Because of love for his father. So, and then it gets even better as it continues. Verse 8, Mephibosheth bowed down and said, what is your servant, that you should notice a dead dog like me? And the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, now remember, Ziba was the guy who's like, yeah, this kid's got broken ankles, don't really want him around. And he says to Ziba, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops so that your master's grandson may be provided for. So Ziba is now serving Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table. Table.
Table.
Ziba's table.
Ziba table.
That's a good restaurant. If Ziba ever starts a restaurant. Come on up to Ziba's table.
Ziba table.
All right. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. That dude's got his own, huge family he's taking care of. And so now all these people are taking care of Mephibosheth. And Ziba said to the king, your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do. He's super enthused about it. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. That's just a beautiful statement. Because it's really about us. We'll look at that in a minute. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. Oh, and he was lame in both feet. Isn't that neat? And it's repeated over and over again, right? Eating at the king's table, eating at the king's table. This is obviously something that the Holy Spirit wants us to pick up on in this account of this young man's life. Because it's a beautiful illustration of grace. It's a beautiful illustration of the kind of grace that each of us have received in Christ. Okay? I mean, just imagine Mephibosheth hobbling up to the table, and there he's sitting at this grand occasion with, you've got Solomon there, there's Tamar, there's Absalom, Joab, Amnon, all of these people who are either military rulers or just beautiful in appearance, or like Solomon was the wisest of men. And so you have all of these people who are there, and here's Mephibosheth in the crowd. Likely younger than they are, and nothing about him seems to be impressive. But it's the grace that was offered him that made all the difference. So here's the analogies between Mephibosheth's story and our story. It's neat because the Bible doesn't go into just describing these things in detail. It just drops this mystery, this metaphor for us in this person's life. I mean, this was a true event that happened for this person that lived long ago. But there are so many things that just line up with the theology of grace and the story of the new covenant that we have with God through Christ that we can pick up on in the picture of this person's life, Mephibosheth. So here's the connections. You have Mephibosheth, who was basically related to Saul. Saul is the blank there. He was kind of put into his position by virtue of the fact he was Saul's grandson, right? Then you have Adam, who was put into his position by virtue of the fact that he was created by God. So God is the other blank. So you have, as Mephibosheth is to Saul, Adam was to God. Adam was placed in this beautiful palace of a garden, right? It doesn't get any more beautiful, I can tell you from experience just last week, than the building God created, or the structure that God created on this earth. And so Adam is enjoying the best of that, and even the companionship that God created for him. Both Adam and Eve are able to experience what life in a true kingdom as a son of a king truly is like. This is how Mephibosheth's life began. But then there was a fall that took place, and the fall was sin, right? Well, Mephibosheth's fall was from a nurse who dropped him. But when Mephibosheth fell, it led to a crippling. Crippling is a blank. And it led to fear. So we know for Mephibosheth, he was crippled, lame in both feet from the age of 5 on because of the fall. We also know that because we are not, even before we commit our first sin as conscious individuals who know right from wrong, once we kind of reach an age of accountability, even before then, we are born into a world that is affected by sin, into a family of people that sin, and those sins have effects on us as well. So all of us are born into a crippled state of what we were actually created to live. And that crippled state, we're not able to live to our full potential. We're not able to enjoy creation to its full potential. We've noticed that, we've picked up on that, but also we live in fear because of sin. Once we start to understand what right and wrong is and that we've committed that sin, our relationship is formed and begins sometimes with God in fear for the fact that He is a holy judge, right? So that's the way it is for us. We're spiritually invalid, hiding from God because of the fall. David loved Jonathan, and he treated Mephibosheth in Jonathan's honor. And so for us, the grace we receive was actually earned by someone else, and that's Jesus. So God loves His Son, Jesus, and He treats us in His Son's honor, just like David treated Mephibosheth in Jonathan's honor. And you obviously can see how Jesus has even greater honor, because it wasn't just that Jesus was in the family of God as His only Son, but Jesus actually paid for the kind of holiness that we would require by going to the cross for us. So when Jonathan died in battle, he wasn't dying for Mephibosheth, but David was still able to show Mephibosheth favor because of his love for Jonathan. So Mephibosheth had nothing to offer the king, couldn't even begin to win his favor. It's not like Mephibosheth could roar into battle and win these military victories. He spent his whole life in this tucked away place, probably doesn't have the greatest education. We don't really know anything else about Mephibosheth other than this event that happens in his life. So it's not like he comes around later and makes a huge difference in the kingdom. But even with all of that said, even though Mephibosheth had nothing to offer, he still had the favor of the king. In the same way, we have nothing to add to God, yet God sets His heart on us. So God wants us in His family, wants us to sit at the table with these other great creatures that He's created, and even other people that God has used in these great ways, we're invited to the same table. So David restored Mephibosheth from a place of barrenness, literally, Lo-debar, to a place of honor at the king's table. So honor's a blank. God has restored us, is in the process of restoring us to what we once had in Adam. What I mean by that is, this whole story comes full circle. What God created us in the Garden of Eden, will now be restored in the New Jerusalem once Satan, sin, and death have been destroyed. And we are able to live to the full potential that God has created us to live without the distractions of Satan, sin, and death there in this New Jerusalem that God has created for us. And so Revelation describes the return of Genesis, if you will. Except in the garden, instead of it being a garden, it's going to be a city. And so this is all just extra. But God cultivates. God put Adam and Eve in the garden to cultivate it, to build it up. And they did kind of an okay job, but then got distracted with that whole fruit and tree thing. So God himself cultivates the city that Adam and Eve were supposed to be cultivating, but never got to the finish of. And so this cultivated city where Jesus says, I will go prepare a place for you, will be brought to us to enjoy to its fullest potential. So, where were we? Place of honor in what we once had in Adam. So that's number 5. Number 6, David took Mephibosheth into his family. And so Mephibosheth was indistinguishable from all the other sons in the family. I mean, you could see the difference. But as far as David was concerned, he was treated the same. Every Christian is not just accepted in the family, we are adopted into the family. So this is the sense that when we are in this cultivated city that God has created for us, that we are going to be just as much the rightful sons and daughters of God as even Jesus himself. Because we haven't just been accepted as broken people, but we are adopted as sons and daughters of the King. So pretty cool. Number 7, Meth's crippling was a constant reminder of David's grace. And our struggle with sin even today is a constant reminder of God's grace. So the rest of Mephibosheth's life, it wasn't like David cured him of the crippling. He just gave him a place of status and honor, and people were serving him and such. But Mephibosheth was still hobbling to the table every night. The same thing is true for us. We are established in a place that we are yet to be able to fulfill completely. That's what this whole sanctification process is all about for us. When Paul talks about working out our salvation in fear and trembling, he's not saying, make sure you get to a point where you're saved. He's saying, realize that you're saved, and so work that out as much as you can. Figure out what it means like to live in the freedom of Christ and to be able to desire the same things that God desires as a natural progression in your growth in Christ. So that's what we're after. But until then, every time we struggle with temptation or sin, it's a reminder of the weakness that's come from the fall. Whether the fall has affected the environment around us or even within us. The old habits and tendencies of sin. Mephibosheth was treated like any other child of the king, will be treated like Paul, Peter, Abraham, etc., and King David himself. So we talked about that, how it's not just about acceptance, it's about being adopted into the kingdom. And this kind of grace, this kind of covenant relationship with our King is eternal. And it is absolutely free to us, but it came at the greatest cost known to man, to Christ. So it gives us a picture of how we can appreciate the type of change that happens when we realize the kindness of God based on his love for Christ and the grace it offers us. Questions, comments, or anything? Pretty neat story. I think it's the highlight of David's kingdom when he does this. I mean, it's cool that he wins all these victories in battle and things like that, but showing grace to this person at the height of his kingdom I think is just, this is the man after God's heart that we're seeing. So next week, not so much. And we'll get to that next week. But before we finish up today, I had some prayer requests written down somewhere. I don't know what to do with them. Well, we're just going to have to go